Here's a paradox that shouldn't exist. The average worker in Japan earns about $49,000 a year. The average American earns around $80,000. That's not a small gap. The Japanese paycheck is barely more than half of ours. And it's not a bad year fluke. Japanese wages have been frozen in real terms for almost 30 years. By almost every measure, the typical Japanese worker is underpaid compared to nearly every other wealthy country on earth. So explain this. Despite those low salaries, Japanese households are sitting on one of the largest piles of money on the planet, over $15 trillion in savings, according to the Bank of Japan. And here's the part that should really stop you. Nearly half of that fortune is just cash, sitting in the bank. Not stocks, not crypto, not real estate. Plain money they simply chose not to spend. They didn't out-earn America. They out-saved it by a mile. And behind that entire culture of quietly keeping money is one specific habit, a tool that's 120 years old, invented by the last person you'd ever expect. In a few minutes, I'm going to hand it to you, step by step, so you can use it this week. But not yet, because if I just gave you the tool right now, it wouldn't work. First, you have to understand why your money keeps vanishing in the first place. And the real reason is a little disturbing. The number nobody says out loud. Let's start with the mirror. The average American saves under 5 cents out of every dollar they bring home. The Bureau of Economic Analysis tracks this every single month, and for years now the personal savings rate has hovered around 4 to 5%. 5 cents on the dollar, that's what's left after everything. Now, the instinct, the very American instinct, is to say, well, I just need to make more. More income, a raise, a side hustle, a better job, and it feels obviously true. But here's the trap, and it's the whole reason this video exists. If the money is leaking, a bigger paycheck doesn't fix the leak. It just runs more water through the same holes, faster. Picture two buckets in the same rainstorm. The first is enormous, but the bottom is full of holes. The rain pours in and pours right back out. The second is small, but it's solid steel, no holes. At the end of the storm, the giant leaking bucket is nearly empty, and the little steel cup is full. The size of the bucket was never the point. The holes were. So the real question isn't, how do I catch more rain? It's, where are my holes? And to find them, you have to understand a strange thing that happened to money itself. Why money became invisible. Think about the last thing you bought. Did you feel it? Probably not, because you tapped a card or clicked buy now or waved your phone at a reader and walked out. The money never touched your hand. You never watched it leave. That missing feeling has a name. Back in 1998, two researchers named Drazen Prelek and George Lowenstein described something they called the pain of paying. The small, real sting your brain feels when it parts with money. That sting isn't a bug, it's a break. It's supposed to make you hesitate. And a decade later, researchers Priya Rahuber and Joydeep Srivastava ran a study they nicknamed Monopoly Money. And what they found is a little frightening. When money doesn't feel real, people spend far more freely. In related experiments, people were willing to pay roughly twice as much for the exact same item when using a card instead of cash. Same item, same person, double the spending, purely because the card numbed the pain. Now sit with that. Every tap to pay, every saved card number, every one-click checkout was engineered on purpose to remove that break. Companies spent billions making spending feel like nothing. And it worked. The holes in your bucket aren't a character flaw. They were installed. Which brings us finally to the tool. Because the Japanese habit does the one thing every app and every card was designed to prevent. It puts the pain back. And the story of where it came from is not what you'd guess. The 120-year-old fix. In 1904, in Japan, a woman named Hani Motoko did something almost no woman was allowed to do at the time. She became the country's first female journalist. And in a women's magazine, she published a simple system for managing household money. She called it kakeibo. It translates roughly to household financial ledger. Remember, this was a moment when most Japanese women couldn't even own property. What Hani Motoko was really handing them was control. And here's the wild part. 120 years later, that same system is still in print, still a bestseller. And for the people who actually use it, it still beats nearly every budgeting app on your phone, which makes no sense at first. Kakeibo is a pen and a paper notebook. That's it. No syncing, no automation, no dashboard. In 2026, that sounds like a downgrade. So why would something this low-tech outperform software built by billion-dollar companies? Because the slowness is the point. When you have to physically stop, pick up a pen and write lunch delivery, $18, your brain finally processes it. You feel the $18. The app hides the pain. The notebook forces you to feel it. Kakeibo isn't competing with your budgeting app on convenience. It's beating it on the one thing that actually changes behavior: friction. How it actually works. The method itself is almost embarrassingly simple. Once a month, you sit down and answer 4 questions. How much money is coming in? How much do I want to save? How much do I have to spend on the non-negotiables? Rent, food, utilities, and how am I going to do better than last month? Notice the order because it's the whole trick. Most people spend first and try to save whatever's left over, which is almost always nothing. Kakeibo flips the equation. Income minus savings equals what you're allowed to spend. You pay yourself first. You pull the savings out the moment the money lands, before your brain can touch it, and then you run your life on what remains. Take $500 out of a $3,000 paycheck up front, and suddenly you're living on $2,500. And something funny happens. You get creative. You stop leaking. Then, every day, you spend 3 minutes writing down what you spent, sorted into a few plain buckets. Things you truly need, things you just wanted, things that genuinely make you better, like a book or a class. And the surprises. 3 minutes a day. That's the engine of the entire system. And here's why the daily part matters more than it sounds. Most people only look at their money at the end of the month, but by then, it's an autopsy. The patient's already dead. You're just reading the cause. Kakeibo is a daily checkup, while you can still change the outcome. There's one more move, and it might be the most powerful of all. The one that quietly kills impulse spending for good. When you want something that isn't a real need, you don't buy it, you write it on a list, and you wait 30 days. Most of the time, when you come back to that list, the urge is simply gone. You weren't hungry for the thing. You were bored or tired or stressed, and buying was the bandage. Wait 30 days, and 9 times out of 10, you save the money by doing absolutely nothing. But wait, don't the Japanese barely save anymore? Now, if you've done any digging, you might be about to catch me in something. You might have read that Japan's national savings rate today is actually near zero. And you'd be right. So how do I square that with a country sitting on $15 trillion in cash? This is the most important 90 seconds of the video, so stay with me. There's a difference between a flow and a stock. The savings rate is a flow. How much of this year's income a country sets aside. Japan's is low right now for one main reason. It's an old country. A huge share of the population is retired, and retirees don't save. They spend down the fortune they already built. That draws the yearly number towards zero. But the stock, the mountain of money already saved, is enormous, and it's still growing. Japanese household assets have doubled since 1990. That pile wasn't built by high salaries. It was built by decades of exactly the boring, deliberate pen and paper habit we're talking about. So no, this isn't the myth you'll see online that Japanese families save 35% of their income. That's not true, and I'm not going to lie to you to sell you a method. The honest version is better. On modest paychecks, they quietly built one of the biggest saving stockpiles on Earth. That's the part worth stealing. Why this matters more the older you are. And in America, the stakes here are not abstract. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the most thorough look at U.S. household money there is, found that the typical American household has only about $87,000 saved for retirement. More than half of households have no dedicated retirement savings at all. For people in their late 30s and early 40s who do have a retirement account, the median balance sits around $45,000. Those aren't numbers about people who don't earn enough. Plenty of them out-earn the average Japanese worker 2 to 1. They're numbers about buckets full of holes. If you're past 30 and that stat stung a little, good. That sting is the same break we've been talking about, and it's telling you the truth. The income was never the problem. The gap was. Now let me be fair, because this can absolutely be taken too far. Kakeibo is not a command to squeeze every dollar until your life is joyless. Turning frugality into your entire identity, feeling guilty buying your kid an ice cream, isn't wealth. It's just a nicer looking cage. And there are real seasons where saving almost nothing isn't a discipline failure at all. A medical crisis, a stretch of genuinely low income, a period where just surviving is the whole job. If that's you, no notebook gets to shame you. The goal was never deprivation. The goal is visibility, being able to see your money clearly enough to actually choose. That's the entire difference between someone who ends up wealthy on a small salary and someone who stays broke on a big one. Not willpower, sight. And finally, the 7 days challenge. So this week, do one thing. For the next 7 days, write down every single cent you spend. A notebook, a napkin, a note on your phone. It doesn't matter. Circle the wants in red and add them up. That number is your first patched hole. But catching the money is only half the story. Cash sitting in a bank, like half of Japan's fortune, slowly bleeds out to inflation. Saving builds the surplus. The surplus only becomes wealth when you put it to work and let it compound. And compounding hides a brutal, boring stretch in the middle where almost everyone quits right before it finally pays off. That's the exact thing you have to master next. And I made a whole video on how to survive it. I'll leave it right here. See you there.